This week, I'm going to show you how to shoot a time lapse. A time-lapse is basically where you shoot at a really slow frame rate and then speed this up to normal rates. It's typically used to show the passing of time or to show movements that are too slow to be seen with the naked eye. I tend to look for things that are moving through the frame, like clouds, boats, people, cars, or shadows, or maybe even the rising or setting of the sun or the moon. It can also be used on a macro level. When shot properly, they look really interesting and can add another dimension to your videos. All you need is a camera, a tripod, an ND filter, and if your camera hasn't got the time-lapse option built into it, an intervalometer. At the moment, this camera is shooting 25 frames a second. This basically means it's taking 25 photographs every second. To shoot a time-lapse, you would take a frame every second, up to something like every 10 seconds or even slower. Then you'd get all of these photos together and play them back at 25 frames a second. If you have a modern smartphone, you can shoot these through the camera app, or you can buy dedicated time-lapse apps. If you have a camera like the GH4, the GH5, or the new Canon cameras, they'll have a time-lapse option built in. If you are shooting with a Sony or a camera that doesn't have this function, you need an intervalometer. So there are a few rules to get a good time-lapse. You've got to keep your camera rock steady. If you move it at all, it'll ruin the time-lapse video. I'll put my camera on a sturdy tripod. If it's windy, I'll weigh the tripod down with my bag. Apart from the usual variables in photography, there are two main things to think about to change the appearance of the time-lapse: the interval time and the shutter speed. The interval time is the time between frames. This can vary from 1 per second to 1 per hour and even longer. Shutter speed determines how moving objects look in the frame. With a fast shutter speed, fast moving objects can look a little jumpy and jittery. With slower shutter speeds, movement can look smoother up to a point. However, if the shutter speed is too long, fast moving objects will start to disappear. In these separate sequences, you can see how different shutter speeds can affect a time-lapse. I shot them all at a 1 second interval and just varied the shutter speed. If you look at them side by side, you can see the difference. With a 1 second interval, I prefer to drag the shutter speed so it's about half a second. Any intervals that are longer than this, you need to experiment with the look that you want. This is why I suggest using an ND filter. It'll enable you to get the slower shutter speeds, especially in the middle of the day or when there's lots of light around. I also try and use a manual focus lens. When you take a photo on a more automated lens, the aperture system will close down and open up every time you take a photo. So because of this, you get minute differences in the aperture. This will cause a flickering on your time-lapse when you play it back in a sequence. You can get rid of this flicker with software like LR Timelapse, but it does increase the amount of post-processing that you'll have to do. So with a fully manual lens, you'll be able to change the aperture to what you want and keep it there. It won't ever change unless you change the aperture dial. I normally shoot 350 images for a time-lapse. This will give me 14 seconds of video when sped up to 25 frames a second. Once I've worked out the interval, I'll then use the calculator on my phone to work out how long I'm going to have to wait for the time-lapse to finish. So this is how I go about making a time-lapse. Put the camera on a sturdy tripod. Frame the shot how you want it. Set the focus and switch to manual focus. Switch to manual mode. Set the exposure. Attach the ND filter if you can't get your shutter speed low enough. Reset the exposure now the ND filter has been attached, dropping your shutter speed to about half a second for a 1 second interval. If you have a camera with the time-lapse function built in, set it to shoot at the intervals that you want. If you don't have a time-lapse function built into your camera, You'll need an intervalometer. Plug in the intervalometer. Set the intervalometer to the time that you want. Set the drive mode to single shot. Start the time lapse. Wait whilst it takes the shot. I've shot some time lapses where I set the number of images to 350. Just as it was coming to the end, something interesting was happening in the frame, and there was no way for me to carry on the time lapse. What I do now is set the number of frames really high or to infinity. Then I can stop the time lapse when I want. Before you stop it, have a look at the frame and see if anything is happening in the shot, like a boat going through the shot, a plane flying through, or a nice cloud formation building up. If it is, wait for this thing to happen, then stop the time lapse. As a very general rule, for things like boats, cars and people that are moving quite fast, I keep the interval to 1 second. For clouds that are fast moving, 2 seconds seems to work okay. For slow moving clouds, I'll keep the interval between 5 and 10 seconds. And if I want to get a time lapse of the sun moving through the frame, I'll keep the interval to 10 seconds. Once you've finished the time lapse, think about doing a few more with different framings, maybe a medium or a close-up. Then when you go to edit, it'll make things easier. You'll be able to crop in on certain details or interesting things that you spotted in the day. I'll tend to shoot 3 or 4 different framings. Then I can cut between these. Some of the cameras like the GH4 or GH5 will ask if you want to compile the video in the camera. I'll do this when I'm shooting on my GH4 because then I can see what the time lapse is going to look like. I'll process them in the computer afterwards, but this will give me a preview of the video. The best way I find to shoot a time lapse is to shoot in RAW and then bring them back into your computer. You can then process these images and then output them into a sequence. If you haven't got an ND filter or an intervalometer, I'll put some links in the description. Check these out. They're not that expensive, so you can get them and start shooting time lapses yourself. Sometimes you'll take a time lapse and it'll look really good, and other times it won't look that great. Work out why this is and change that. Normally time lapses don't look that great when they don't have much movement in the shot. So you want to show the passing of time with, say, like clouds billowing up or cars and traffic moving through the shot. And that's about it for shooting a time lapse. Next week, I'll show you how I compile them in my computer, how I edit them, and how I output them. If you're watching this in the future, click on the eye in the corner or one of the tags at the end. This will take you to the editing tutorial. As always, if you like what you see, give me a thumbs up. If you didn't, give me a thumbs down. And for weekly tutorials, hints and tips in photography and videography, subscribe and turn on notifications. I'll see you in the next one.